Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know what time zone you are in, but wherever you happen to be on this planet of ours, I am just glad that you've tuned in. My name, Sean Boonstra. I am the host of Disclosure. That's the show you're listening to right now, and what that means is that you will be forced to listen to the dulcet tones of my voice for, well, I guess however long you choose to tune in, at least till you can't handle the sound of my voice anymore. But I don't think you're going to want to tune out. I think today you're going to want to listen to the show. You're going to find this subject really interesting because over the last couple of years, I guarantee you've heard a lot about transgenderism. And most of the public debate actually centered around transgender bathrooms. I think that all went down in North Carolina. And I know this might date me or make some of you think, ooh, it's an old fogey on the radio, just stuck in his ways. But I've got to say, back when I was a kid in the really olden days of the 1970s, I just don't remember much talk about boys who felt like they were actually girls and girls who actually felt like they were boys. Now, I'm not going to suggest it didn't happen. I mean, it probably did happen here and there. I'm guessing it was going on. But what we didn't have was a lot of talk about it. Nobody's talking about it back in the 1970s. This wasn't the kind of thing that made the front page of the newspaper or the evening news. Now, just by way of explanation, if you happen to be under the age of 30 or 35, let me explain. Look, a newspaper was how we got our news back in the olden days when I was a kid. I know it's hard to imagine, but we didn't have smartphones and we didn't have tablets and the only people who had the internet in the 1970s was probably the military. So the rest of us got our news on printed paper or murdered trees, I guess, if you want to put it in the modern vernacular. So if you didn't know what was going on in the news, you had to wait till tomorrow to get a newspaper on your front step. Now, we didn't see a lot of talk about transgenderism. It just wasn't going on. Today, it really has blown up into a huge topic. And a lot of the conversation I've noticed is just emotionally based. I don't hear a lot of facts behind the discussion. I don't hear a lot of people saying, here's the published research, here are the facts and figures, here is the science behind that. So on today's show, I've asked Dr. Michelle Cretella. Now, she's the president of the American College of Pediatricians. I've asked her to join us on the show because as I was surfing the web this past summer, I stumbled across an article she wrote about transgender ideology and how it's impacted the field of pediatrics. And then that led me to a peer-reviewed article she wrote in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons back in the summer of 2016 on gender dysphoria. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, but before we get to that, before I put Dr. Cretella on the air, let me just offer this one little caution. If you've got little kids somewhere in the room and you don't want them listening to a frank discussion on human sexuality, then it might be a good idea to get this show later on the website or download it as a podcast because we're going to deal frankly with the issue. The other thing I want to say is, look, and this is kind of a boilerplate disclaimer, even though I am interviewing a real doctor, a real pediatrician, this show, let me say this show is not intended to replace your physician. This is not intended to serve as a diagnostic or a treatment tool. This is not to replace your family physician. Please, before you make any decisions ever about medicine, always, always, always do your homework and consult with your own doctor before making any serious medical decisions. Now that I have said that, Dr. Cretella, I am so glad you've taken a few moments out of your busy schedule to join us here on Disclosure. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Hey, listen, tell me a little bit about the American College of Pediatricians, your background, your practice, and what it is that you do.
Sure. The American College of Pediatricians is a national organization of pediatricians and other child health professionals, such as therapists, psychologists, who have come together essentially to promote the best policies dedicated to the optimal health of children. We were founded in 2002. We broke away from the 87-year-old American Academy of Pediatrics because since 1973, that academy has been increasingly embracing the political correctness of the sexual revolution.
Okay.
basically putting that over and above the good of children and over and above parental rights.
So, in your opinion, even if it seems that there is no science to back it, that opinion was beginning to drive, patient outcome decisions and just medical practice decisions rather than solid science.
Exactly. And the way the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, works is very similar to the major medical organizations most of the public is aware of, for example, the AMA and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. The way they work, they have very small committees that are self-selecting that determine what the organization as a whole will promote as standard of care on social issues.
Right, and so a group of you decided you weren't liking some of what you saw, and it seemed to be driven by there was a wrong motivation. It was no longer
wrong motivation. Yes, yeah. It was increasingly left-leaning politics that was overriding science, and essentially the AAP was not listening to its membership. An example is when they endorsed same-sex parenting back in 2002, they received a slew of objections, even from their own bioethics committee, but they published it over the negative judgment of it. Their bioethics committee said, there's not enough science here, you should not be promoting this. They did so anyway, and then the larger membership objected, but the AAP did nothing about it. So that was the last straw for our. It started out roughly maybe a core group of 20 pediatricians had gotten together and said, you know what, we've been trying for years to fight for the best for children from within the AAP, but we and others were just not being heard. So they said we have to make our own group.
So that led to the American College of Pediatricians. Boy, there were a lot of acronyms thrown out there. And the one I'm starting to pay attention to between you and me is the AARP, because I've noticed I'm getting really close to that line faster than I thought it would happen. I qualify. Yeah. My wife pokes me once in a while. She's not quite as old, saying, look, in another 2 years, you qualify. And it's like, oh, my goodness, that came quick. Hey, listen, you mentioned the sexual revolution, and obviously I've given my general age. And I grew up with the results of that. It was the generation just before me that kind of launched the sexual revolution. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I want to ask you is today's topic, we're really going to be dealing with transgenderism, which is hot in the news. Everybody's talking about it. But when did you start to notice a change in the way that you kind of alluded to it, but when did you notice a change in the medical and the psychological communities that in dealing with the issue of transgenderism and some of these other issues out of the sexual revolution? Has this been building since the 60s and 70s, or is this a recent development?
I would say, it was diagnosed or recognized as a diagnosis in 1980. In 1980, the Bible of the American Psychiatric Association, abbreviated the DSM. DSM recognized transgenderism as the gender identity disorder.
Okay.
And so initially, it was understood that, okay, there's a problem in the thinking and perception here that makes this a disorder. The person has a wrong perception of their biological sex. But increasingly from 1980 forward, particularly in the early 2000s, that diagnostic manual was revised. And with each revision, they shifted away from the problem is the thinking to the person's problem that makes this a disorder is that they're distressed. It's their unhappiness is the problem. Their distress is the problem, not the thinking. And this developed in the context of the politics. Transgenderism went from being viewed as a mental disorder to a civil rights issue. So by the time we got to the early 2000s, the myth that a man could okay, the myth that you could have a woman trapped in a man's body was beginning to really take hold.
Now, you say that's a myth, even though it's presented all the time to me as a fact. I'm a woman.
All the time as a fact. And
right.
In 2007, Dr. Michael Bailey, a psychologist who is a gender specialist for decades now, decades and decades, published an article in a psychological journal entitled "What Transgender Activists Don't Want You to Know, But You Should Know Anyway." And he calls it right out. This is a myth that is harmful not only to society, but it's harmful even to those who are afflicted with these feelings of being in the wrong body.
So if I'm hearing you right, there was a shift from treating a disorder to treating an emotion rather than,
an emotion.
Like, I don't like how I feel, so we're treating it wouldn't be unlike just using opiates to kill pain but not cutting out the tumor.
Right. Or even more similarly, Dr. Paul McHugh, who one of the most distinguished, actually the most distinguished psychiatrist of the last 50 years, head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, equates it with anorexia. It's, the child or adult with anorexia believes, they look in the mirror and they see this obese person when in fact they are emaciated.
Right.
So, and they are distressed by that misbelief, by that mistaken belief. They are deeply distressed by it. They would feel a lot happier if we were to give them liposuction, but that's not dealing with the underlying problem. And although they may be happy with liposuction, it will ultimately, in the long term, kill them. So
right.
We're taking the same approach. We're taking the same approach here, and the reason, and this always seems to happen in medicine, we maintain our sanity on all topics until it comes to sex.
Right. Okay, we're up against a hard break. Dr. Cretella, we're going to just take a quick break. I'll be right back with Dr. Michelle Cretella, the American College of Pediatricians.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And we are back from the break. I hope that you were jotting some of that information down and taking advantage of those wonderful offers from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. My guest today on the program is Dr. Michelle Cretella, the president of the American College of Pediatricians, and we're talking about transgender issues today. Dr. Cretella, maybe we should start by defining what gender dysphoria is. I know some of the papers that you've published deal with gender dysphoria. People are familiar with what transgenderism is because that just kind of blew up and became a big issue in, I think it was North Carolina, with public washrooms and so on. But we're really discussing gender dysphoria. Maybe help us understand what that is.
Sure. In fact, I'm going to back up just even a little bit before that.
Okay.
What is very important to understand is that everyone is born with a biological sex.
Right.
Biological sex, male or female, is set at conception and cannot change. Gender it's become a politicized term, and it was hijacked back in the 1950s by sex researchers who, the surgeons, it was actually hijacked by the sex experts who were trying to defend doing sex reassignment surgery. They took the term gender, which back in the 1950s just referred to male or female.
So it was a biological term.
So it was definitely linked to biological sex. But they took that word gender and said, oh, no, for us, gender means an internal sexed identity that could be different from the biological sex.
Right. And I guess that's probably a lot of what, the average Joe Sixpack like me doesn't get, is that
right.
they've redefined what gender is. When I see gender, I'm writing down biological sex.
And as it should be and always was. There is no such thing as an internal gender. We have a biological sex.
Right.
And there are sex differences that are biological, and in fact, we just had a study that came out a few weeks ago that found 6,500 different genetic differences between men and women. So biological sex is real, there are real sex differences, and there are sex stereotypes. Example, women, like women wearing dresses, women being more chatty and more, they should only be teachers, right? So some of those sex stereotypes are damaging.
Sure.
We can make judgments on those.
Oh, my wife laughs at the idea that women are more chatty because I am clearly the chattier half of our marriage.
Right. So you get my point. So
sure.
Gender, the biggest problem we have with this issue is the word gender. Because it went from being the same, meaning male or female, to now being this pure invention of something innate to the person when it just is not.
Right.
So now to answer your original question, so what do we mean by gender dysphoria? Originally, it was labeled gender identity disorder back in 1980. And so in 1980, within the definition, the focus was equal. It was equal parts, the thinking of the person is problematic because they feel like they're the opposite sex, but they're not. So we're treating, we want to get to the root of that belief, and we also want to treat their emotional distress.
So how prevalent has this become? You mentioned it sort of from the 1980s forward, this starts showing up in literature and so on. How much attention is the medical world giving this issue?
Okay, so over time, it really was not given a lot of attention by the medicine or psychiatry because it was far less. It was a fraction of a percentage of adults and even children who were ever involved. But again, what happened with the shift, they got rid of the term gender identity disorder. They have shifted to calling it gender dysphoria. Dysphoria basically means upset or emotional distress.
So we're not talking then about, say, a genuine hermaphrodite, like...
Absolutely not, no. Right. Hermaphrodite, they tried, the activists have lumped in so-called intersex people or hermaphrodites. Now, people with disorders of sexual development, that's the proper term, disorder of sexual development. That's the proper term for intersex or hermaphrodite. Again, that is a true biological disorder. Right.
That's where you're born with both male and female genitalia, right? Or there's something misfires in gestation. I'm not sure. I'm not a geneticist. So.
But there are many different manifestations. So it's not necessary. It's not being half man, half woman. But there are multiple genetic or hormonal things that can go wrong from conception. Now, that's a tragedy. Again, it's a fraction of a percent of the population.
Right.
that must be dealt with medically and psychologically among a physician, the patient, and the family.
But gender dysphoria, then, we're talking about, I feel like I'm a little girl, but I'm a boy.
Exactly. And the difference between now versus back in prior to 2013, so between 1980 and 2013, the primary response was, okay, this is a problem in the child's thinking, and whatever is causing the problems, the thinking disorder is also causing the emotional distress. So it was approached together. But by 2013, they changed to, oh, no, you know what, this is not, the thinking is not a problem. This is the emotional distress is, and you know what? We now think that the best treatment for this emotional distress is to treat the child as though they were born this way. And so we're going to actually cooperate with their fantasy or confusion.
Let me ask you this. So what is, you talk about treating this idea like I'm a boy born in a girl's body or vice versa. What exactly is the treatment? I mean, I think what got my attention, Doctor, is that you wrote an article some time ago called, or this past summer, I'm a pediatrician, how transgender ideology has infiltrated my field and produced large-scale child abuse. And in a paper that you wrote in, it was a medical journal. I have it here somewhere in front of me.
Yes, the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons.
Right. And that one, of course, I had to go back to my Biology 150 days and pull that out of my hat to read it. By the way, I dropped out of biology. You'd be ashamed of me, Doctor. They showed a childbirth film. I would think, I was considering, hey, maybe medicine. And they showed a childbirth film, and I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this for a living. And I dropped it for the liberal arts, which I'm really good at flipping burgers. But you mentioned that there's a vigorous debate, and so obviously there's controversy here. What is the controversy? Is it over the treatment, and what is that treatment? What are people doing with these children who say, Mom, I feel like I'm a little girl?
Right. So now, sadly, the debate has been lacking. That article I published a year ago, and a year ago there was some debate, but it has been largely suppressed now, which is very concerning.
Sure.
And the reason is because children who, as young as 2 or 3 years old, are being brought to their pediatrician, and mom or dad saying, oh, they're cross-dressing and saying that they're the opposite sex. What do we do? And the pediatrician will then send them to a gender specialist.
Wow.
And
having said that, I remember my youngest, she's 15 now, but my youngest, when she was about 3, sat at the dinner table and told us she was Swedish. And when I tried to explain to her that you are not Swedish, honey, I'm sorry, you're Dutch and British, she broke into tears, but I am Swedish. And she pretended she was Swedish for a week. She's 3-4 years old.
Yes.
It seems to me that children, if I were to tell a little girl, hey, you're actually a little boy, they might buy it for a few days. I don't know that 2 or 3 years old makes sense to me.
Okay, and what you were saying is very important, because no one who is pushing this, they're basically ignoring cognitive development of children.
Sure.
And that's because, just as you said, there are 3 stages to gender identity in the sense of recognizing, am I a boy or a girl, and what does that mean? At age 3, most children can correctly say, I'm a boy or I'm a girl.
Sure.
Most will know that they have their quote-unquote gender identity. It is not until age 7 that boys and girls understand sex is permanent.
Okay.
So age 3, they can say, "Boy, I'm a boy or a girl" correctly. Age 5, they've begun to understand, oh, boys grow into men, girls grow into women. However, if you take kids between ages 3 and 7 and introduce, hey, this is your classmate Joey,
right,
and then Joey puts on a dress, makeup, and high heels.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but now Joey is Josephina. He's a girl. Many children will believe that he has just transformed, or at a very minimum, they will be very confused.
Well, I've actually heard of, and I don't want to make the exceptions that I see in the news always the rule, but there seem to be these stories where they have a little party at school, and little 5-year-old boy goes into a change room, comes out a little girl, and the class learns that day that you can change. And I scratch my head because while I'm not a child development expert, it seems to me that at 5, I can tell those kids that there's a tooth fairy, and they'll believe that too.
Yes, and this is it. And so the gender identity, the stages of gender identity, that was Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg, and for decades now, we have been, psychology students, medical students, you learn about this in these stages. And in addition, Jean Piaget is another well-accepted developmental psychologist who refers to that early childhood period, let's say between 2 and 7 or 8, as a time of intense magical thinking, in which they have difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality. Our job as parents and adults is to help our children get in touch with reality.
Right.
It's to affirm them in the uniqueness and beauty and goodness of their bodies and of who they are as a boy or a girl.
I wish you could see everybody in the control room right now. There's a bunch of parents in there, and they're all nodding yes, and lots of them have little children. And I hear the music, too. That means that we're up against another break.
Okay.
Hey, we're with Dr. Michelle Cretella of the American College of Pediatricians. She heads that organization. You are listening to Disclosure. Today we're talking about gender dysphoria and transgenderism, a really hot item in the news. We're going to get into some of the details of what is being done with these children out there in the medical world today. If you've got little ones at home, you might want to get this as a podcast later, or maybe encourage them to do something else so that we can talk openly and frankly about what's going on in Western culture today. My name is Sean Boonstra. I will be right back after this break.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And we are back from our second break. My name is Sean Boonstra. You're listening to Disclosure, the newest radio offering from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. My guest on the program today, Dr. Michelle Cretella, the president of the American College of Pediatricians. We've been discussing gender dysphoria and the transgender issue. And what I really appreciate about Dr. Cretella is that she has a fact-based approach and is cautioning people, saying, wait a minute, we're moving quickly, we're perhaps operating from a politically correct point of view rather than the science behind some of this. And we've been discussing gender dysphoria, this concept that somebody could believe in their brain that they are actually the opposite sex of their biological sex. And we're talking about children in particular. Dr. Cretella, I think what I would like to talk about are a couple of things. Number one, you've alluded to this, that we're really treating the emotions rather than we're treating people's emotions rather than the underlying issue. And then I want to talk a little bit about what is actually being done with these children, because I think that's the part that concerns me most, is that young children are exposed to ideas that they're not probably old enough to process, but then they're being exposed to treatments that seem, well, I'll let you explain it. But you did mention we're treating an emotional disorder. I think you mentioned anorexia as an example. You've also mentioned, maybe it was during one of the breaks, but you've mentioned some other disorders that if we were to treat them like we're treating gender dysphoria, people would be horrified.
Exactly. So a few things. Number one, the myth is out there that children, can be born with a brain that is the different sex from the body. This is complete and utter science fiction.
Right.
It's a myth. Twin studies alone prove that no one is born with predetermined or hardwired for gender dysphoria or transgenderism.
So you're talking identical twins, people who are genetically
Correct.
identical, but if I'm hearing you, that would mean that we've discovered that we might have one of the twins who has gender dysphoria but not the other.
Exactly. So let me explain it. The easiest way to understand this is if transgenderism were determined solely by genes, by our DNA, or solely by prenatal hormones, because you need one or the other to impact the brain.
Right.
Right? So if it were determined solely by DNA or solely by prenatal hormones, every identical twin would have the same gender identity 100% of the time, but they do not.
Right.
So the fact that identical twins can differ in their gender identity proves that it is what happens after birth to cause that difference.
Right. So there's an environmental cause to this.
There is an environmental. Everything about us has some sort of genetic influence or biological influence. But when identical twins are different, that is telling us that the environment, what happens after birth, has an impact. And that's very important to understand because, in fact, if you look at the twin studies, they are very similar results for transgenderism versus anorexia. Mm-hmm. And there is another disorder that is very similar, even more similar to transgenderism. It's a mouthful, body integrity identity disorder.
Can't say that 5 times fast, I'll bet.
Right, no. So, and individuals with body identity integrity disorder are people who believe they are disabled but trapped in a healthy body.
Wow.
And what these individuals want to do, for one example, a woman who since childhood was obsessed with the blind and anything having to do with blindness from childhood, just went to physicians asking them to blind her. And the horrifying thing is that eventually as an adult, she did find a psychiatrist who cooperated with her.
You're kidding.
And basically threw acid in her eyes. And so now she is blind and lives as a blind person. Other individuals with this disorder are convinced that they are amputees, and they will shop around for surgeons who will amputate their healthy limbs.
Wow.
Others still are convinced that they are paralytics, and they will shop around for surgeons who will sever their spinal cords.
Unbelievable.
Now, the scarier thing is these individuals have taken to the internet and are forming a community of trans ableists. And so now you can see the direct analogy. A transgender person is someone who wants to cut off their sexual organs. And medicine and psychiatry look at that and say, oh, yeah, that's normal. They were born that way. Trans ableists just want to cut off and damage different body parts. They want to damage non-sexual body parts. But medicine and psychiatry recognizes them as traumatized.
So we're treating their emotions and
for the transgender individuals, we are saying, oh yeah, they're normal. We just we need to cooperate and do the surgeries and change their hormones because they were born that way. But the science does not support it. Okay, this is pure political activism.
Right.
And but thank God, medicine and psychiatry can still look at these trans ableists and say, no, you have body identity integrity disorder. You have been traumatized in some way to believe that you're, not a healthy person.
Well, I think more people would I think those are great comparisons. More people would raise their eyebrows at me cutting off my limb than me declaring that I'm a woman because of the political atmosphere that we live in.
Exactly. And so, but the most important thing, I'm so sorry, there's so much background.
No, absolutely.
What's really important to understand is we talked about how the transgender activists in medicine, psychiatry, and education are basically disrupting the normal cognitive development of kindergartners, preschoolers, of all children by introducing this gender-bending ideology in schools. When you have a child who is confused and the parents take them as young as age 2 to 3 to a gender specialist clinic, not only are the parents encouraged to, yes, help your child impersonate the opposite sex, require everyone in your family and school system to do the same. Now that P.S. does help the child feel better because the child's having their confusion or fantasy cooperated with.
Sure, we're affirming it.
They're being affirmed in their fantasy or their confusion, and that makes them feel happier. However, as they grow and develop physically, they become terrified of the normal process of puberty. So I'm going to use a little boy just as an example. So a little boy approaches, he's age 9. He knows that his genitals are going to be getting bigger.
Right.
His voice, all these changes.
Right, all that stuff they showed me in the 7th grade booklet.
Coming.
Yep.
There you go. And they freak out. They want to cut off their penis. They don't want this to happen, become very distressed, anxious, depressed. The gender specialist says, we have to block puberty in you. Come on, parents, this is very safe. We're going to put your child on puberty blockers, and they arrest the child's hormonal development. Guidelines say age 12, but around the nation there are multiple examples online. Kids as young as 9, so between the ages of 9 and 12, are put on puberty blockers which arrest their hormonal development. This is important because, A, we have no idea, there are no studies demonstrating that this is safe in children.
Sure.
And B, it's not just about the physical changes. When we arrest their sex hormones, we are arresting their brain development, their bone growth, and we're also arresting their social development. Because think about it, while they're on these blockers, their friends are growing and maturing. So this little boy who's put on a blocker, he stays looking and acting and behaving much like a prepubertal or peripubertal little boy.
That's got to carry some social consequences with it because the late bloomer in every class when I was a kid got teased.
There you go. So that socially isolates them more. Now, the activists say, we want to block them to relieve their anxiety and their depression. And initially, there are some studies, they're very small and poor studies, but it seems initially, again, being on the blockers does, you're cooperating with their fantasy and their confusion, so they kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Phew, okay. However, they become socially isolated. So now the child, the activists say, this is going to give them time to decide that maybe they'll want to go back to their biological sex. Well, no, it doesn't. 100% of kids put on these puberty blockers ask for the sex change hormones because they've been socially isolated. They want to grow just like their peers are growing. But this little boy, he doesn't identify with his boy peers. He feels more isolated from them, and his fantasy and confusion says, I want to be a girl, so he asks for estrogen.
Wow.
Because he wants to grow. Okay. Now, what's the damage? Is there other damage from the puberty blockers? The biggest damage is this. If you have a very young child on puberty blockers and then you put them over to the sex change hormones seamlessly,
right,
they become permanently sterile.
Okay, so that ends the I guess the big question that, I'm hearing sterility, I'm hearing a little boy delaying puberty. Look, if I'm really honest, I was kind of brain dead until I was 18 or 19. Most men kind of are brain dead, and I had no way of assessing risk at the age of 18. I did the most stupid things, driving irresponsibly, no idea of risk. How much idea of risk does a 9-year-old have?
Absolutely not. None. It's not possible whatsoever. As you said, we know, common sense, even Shakespeare knew this, as you said, age 18, adolescence, we do not, at those ages, we simply do not have the experience, nor do we have the brain development, the cognitive development to assess risk. We don't have as much self-control either. This is known. That's why we have ages for voting, for drinking, and for driver's licenses, serving in the armed forces. Everyone knows this. It is self-evident. And now more than ever, we have the neuroscience to prove it, that the brain does not fully, the areas of the brain to assess risk and exert self-control are not fully developed until age 25.
25.
So, right.
And you know what? That's the age. That's the age I've given my daughters for a husband. I said, look,
I know,
no young man is capable of real romance till he has a career and he's 25.
Yes, I like that. Yes, careers. Very important.
Right.
No, but so this is very anti-science, and what's worse, so I used a little boy as an example. Then little girl, same example. She too would be permanently sterile if she went that route. What is even scarier for biological girls is that once they have been on testosterone, because that would be their sex change hormone, they've been on testosterone every day for 1 year, then they can get a double mastectomy at age 16.
Wow. At age 16. I can't imagine my daughters making that decision. We're up against another break, and I do want to ask one more interesting question when we come back from the break, Doctor, and it's this. What would happen if they didn't go on those blockers, or if they stopped the blockers and never went through with the change? What happens in most of the... How is gender dysphoria resolved, and what would happen if we didn't treat it? We'll be right back after this break. Here's a message from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. Grab a pen and paper. You want to take advantage of this offer, and I'll be right back. Creation, evolution. Where did the world come from? Where did you come from? Were you created in an instant? Did you evolve from another animal or life species? These are issues that are discussed in classrooms, textbooks, and sometimes around your break table at work, when the conversation suddenly turns serious. These kinds of questions are answered in our free Discover Bible Guides. These 26 beautifully illustrated guides cover all the major themes of the Bible, and they answer some of the hardest questions of life. You can get your free copy just for the asking by contacting me. Go to VOP.com and click on the tab that says Study. That's VOP.com, the tab that says Study, or phone me, 888-456-7933. That's 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides, available just for the asking. And this is it. We're back for our final segment in today's episode of Disclosure. If this was a game of baseball, we would have left third base and be on our way to home. If you're Canadian like me, I'm not sure there's a perfect hockey analogy that I could use, but we'd definitely be in the third period and in the latter half of that. My guest today is Dr. Michelle Cretella, President of the American College of Pediatricians. We've been talking about the transgender debate, particularly from the medical side, and some of the questions that people aren't raising, and some of the things that people aren't saying for fear of being castigated by politically correct movements. And Doctor, before the break, we were talking about the way that this is treated. You know, when a little boy says, "Hey, I'm a little girl," you'd use that example. They block puberty chemically. They begin hormone therapy. It leaves the child sterile, and we've addressed the fact that they might not be psychologically ready to make those kinds of decisions. Few children can make long-term risk assessment decisions. I've noticed in myself that as I get older, I think, if I jump down this rock ledge and I get hurt, I might be off work for a month. I didn't think like that when I was 17.
Definitely not.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the question I want to ask you is, look, we take a child as young as 9. I think that's the low-end number that you gave me. We start them on puberty blockers because he thinks he's the other gender, or she thinks she's the other gender, and then they get estrogen or they get testosterone. My question is this: what would happen if we just let it be?
Right. Now, I've looked in the scientific literature, and prior to all the transgender political activism, it was well accepted that children with gender identity disorder / gender dysphoria, the vast majority, 80 to 95%, outgrew it once they passed naturally through puberty.
So that's almost everybody. Almost everybody. Not quite, but almost.
Almost, yeah. So somewhere between 5 to 20%, looking at all the studies, somewhere between, so as few as 5% to as many as 20% of children with the gender dysphoria persisted in their confusion through late adolescence.
Okay.
And but the idea was to get them to that age 18, 19, in which they were now legally able to make their medical decisions.
Right. And I guess it's important probably to underline that. I am by trade a minister, and so if somebody comes to me with a decision like I want to change sexes and they're 25 years old, I might counsel them about, but it's an adult making a decision, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting children through chemical transformation that, as you say, we don't have studies about the long-term outcomes on this, and 80 to 95% of these cases would have resolved naturally. So when I hit that magical age of 12 where my voice cracks and I start growing an awful mustache and so on, that testosterone in my body is going to help affirm the fact that I am indeed a boy.
Exactly. Now, it's important, the other side now is coming back and saying, oh, those high statistics were false. Okay. They're rewriting history. Those statistics are true, and I do go into it in my writing on the American College of Pediatricians website. So the vast majority, if we support, we're not talking about doing nothing.
Right.
We're talking about supporting these children psychologically, emotionally, treating the family if necessary, because often family dynamics, some kids are in a very abusive situation, and that's why they develop this disorder. But many, many children, I would say the vast majority, the family dynamic is not abusive, but it's being misunderstood or misperceived by the child. So family therapy is key. And supporting the child that way.
Yeah.
And again, as you said, once they go through puberty, if it's a boy, that testosterone kicks in, and now their bodies are developing. Same thing with a girl, her estrogen, her menstruation. By the time they reach late adolescence, young adulthood, they are completely in alignment with their biological sex.
Well, you raised something. You talked about abusive families, and now what I'm going to give you is just anecdotal. I don't have a lot of numbers, but as a minister, I talk to a lot of people, and I can't tell you how often, as I've discussed people that are struggling with sexuality and these kinds of issues, once we have confidence between each other, once we're friends, will tell me, look, I've always struggled with whether or not I'm a real man because when I was 5, somebody molested me. And so I wondered if I was really worth something, if I was a real man. And I've heard it enough that, this is still anecdotal. I don't have hard science, but I've heard it enough that it makes me wonder why the dysphorias happen in the first place.
And that's what physicians and therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists should be asking. And that's what they used to ask. When I first started writing about this on behalf of the American College of Pediatricians, the very first phone call I got at the office was from a therapist in San Francisco who works within the transgender population. And he called me and said, I cannot tell you the name of my practice, the practice where I work, but thank you. I had to call you to say thank you. You are saving lives. 100%, and I believe he told me he'd been working with the transgender population in San Francisco for 10 years, and he said 100% of the biological men who come to him have histories of horrendous childhood abuse. I asked him to give me some examples, and he said several of them were victims of sexual abuse prior to having these feelings and beliefs, and others, it was physical abuse. One example was a boy who, when he misbehaved, his father actually whipped his genitals.
Oh, no.
Others were being cross-dressed by their mothers or grandmothers. So again, this is not the most common. From what I gather from, as you say, it's largely anecdotal. Because of the politics, you're not finding these sorts of things readily published. But based on what was published, let's say from the 80s to even early 2000s, and my conversations with therapists who are experts in this matter, abusive situations happen. Psychopathology within the family can be a cause, but even more commonly might be innocent psychodynamics going on with the child. I
Sure.
had one family, for example. They had their 5-year-old son was cross-dressing, convinced that he was a girl. Those thoughts and feelings started around age 3 when his sister with special needs was born.
Oh, okay.
And what came out in therapy, I mean, this wasn't obvious to me, but what came out in therapy, and it took several months, he finally one day looked up at his parents in the therapy session and said, "You don't love me when I'm a boy. You only love Sissy." Now, the parents were not abusive. They were not doing
Right.
anything wrong. But
And that's probably important for us to point. That's probably
Yeah.
important to point out. I wasn't meaning to suggest that that's always the case. I just
Right. No, and I realize you weren't, but that's the other side will jump on that immediately. Oh,
Sure.
You're promoting hate. You're calling,
Right.
You're blaming the parents and blah, blah, blah. But it's important to recognize, it is important to recognize that some of these cases are due to abuse, but the bulk of them, it's just innocent psychodynamics. There's such a thing as psychology. Children have psychology, and they can misperceive and we have to be very attentive to that. That's where our focus should be.
Let me ask you another psychology question then, and it has to do with those who go through this. I mean, I hear everybody saying if you deny this child the sex reassignment surgery and procedure and the hormone treatments and stuff, they're going to get depressed and they're going to commit suicide. My big question is what happens for those who go through it? Are there regrets on the other side of it when they discover they're sterile, this is for life, and I can't go back?
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, there's absolutely no proof that lack of affirming the confusion, lack of social change, there's no proof that this causes suicide in those children.
Right.
Okay, that's one possibility, but I argue that it is more probable that whatever is causing their depression and their suicidal desire is the same issue that is causing them to want to be the other sex.
Sure.
So anything is possible, but not everything is probable. Okay. So, and there is no scientific evidence for that claim. There's also no scientific evidence that putting them through the social change and the hormones solves suicide.
Well, particularly if you didn't address the underlying psychological issue to begin with, right?
Exactly. Now, sure, there is some, and again, they're small studies and they're very poorly done. 2 studies, actually, that suggest the children on these hormones are more at ease and happier. But that doesn't mean, as you point out, that by the time they get to young adulthood, they're going to realize, oh my gosh, I'm sterile. I really am my biological sex. And you will find some of these stories online. I have had men, biological men who have. One still identifies as in the transgender community, and his name is Renee Jacks.
Right.
He is. He reached out to me and said, "Dr. Cretella, I am solidly with you. I am fighting this with you. I now realize." Now I think he said he's in his 50s, and he realizes that he was misled by his therapists and physicians, and he equates this to Nazi war crimes. He said, "It is clear to me now that I have an underlying psychological issue, and I cannot stand by and allow this to be done to children." I have been contacted by radical feminists who are deeply concerned because they see this as targeting lesbian girls.
Right.
And part of their reasoning is because they are being contacted by young women, 28, around the ages of 28, age 30, who were transitioned as teenagers and are now, they went through the double mastectomies, they were on the testosterone, and now here they are, sterile, no breasts, with permanent voice change and permanent Adam's apple change, and they're angry. These young women are angry, and they're also having difficulty finding, they're terrified because being on sex change hormones increases your risk for heart disease, stroke,
Wow.
diabetes, obesity, all kinds of things. And physicians are scratching their heads saying, well, we don't really know how to advise you because the studies are not out there in terms of, okay, how do we safeguard their health now?
Now, we are just under the 2-minute mark, and so what I'm going to do, Dr. Cretella, is ask you this. Look, a lot of us are sitting on the sidelines. We're parents. We're not doctors. We don't have access to the research. What can ordinary people do about this? I'm watching this. I'm watching these stories of gender affirmation parties in kindergarten, and what do we do? What's the first step? Or what can somebody like me do?
You know what? The first step is to start having conversations with other parents in your school system, friends, family, because we still, it's to start locally. We still elect our school committee members, right? And that's where we can exert the pressure as citizens, is right within our own schools. Where can you go for good information? You can visit our website.
Yeah, and what is the website? I was going to ask you to get that out there before we end. Where can people find you?
Yep, bestforchildren.org. Bestforchildren.org.
Bestforchildren.org.
Yep, and also check out Hands Across the Aisle. If you Google Hands Across the Aisle, they have a listing of just some excellent resources as well. You can also reach out to the college for referrals to therapists.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Dr. Cretella, I see the clock running out of time. I want to thank you for taking a few moments out of your busy schedule to help us understand what's going on in the transgender debate out there in the world and presenting us with some of the facts that nobody seems to be mentioning. And for those of you who are listening, that website again is bestforchildren.org. Dr. Michelle Cretella, thanks for tuning in this week. Until next time.